My name is Josephine Sage Thompson, and for almost 2 years, while I slept in a hospital bed, another woman lived my life. Not just any stranger, but my own twin sister, a sister whose existence was a secret kept from me for 16 years. She slept in my bed, hugged my children, and kissed my husband. When I woke from the coma, no one believed I was me. Not my own children, not the man who had sworn his eternal love to me. Everyone thought I was crazy, an imposter trying to pass herself off as the woman who was, in fact, me. A reality I kept silent for 40 years, and that now, with the end drawing near, I must tell. As I begin to unearth this past that was stolen from me, I want to know who is listening. Where are you listening from? A bustling apartment in New York City, a quiet porch in the Midwest, or maybe while driving down a sunny California coast? Let me know in the comments below. 3 weeks ago, the doctor told me my pancreas is being eaten by cancer. He gave me 6 months, tops. The medicine only serves to ease the pain that's already poking at me from the inside like a fierce animal. That's not why I decided to speak now. No, if it were just for me, I think I'd take this story to my grave. It was my oldest son, Caleb, who insisted. Mom, you have to record this. People need to know what happened. Caleb, who only started calling me Mom for real when he was over 30, who grew up calling another woman Mom while I watched from afar, swallowing a cry that seemed to have no end. The story I'm about to tell happened in the late 72nd, early 82nd. The younger generation can't even imagine how different the world was. There wasn't all this technology, this easy DNA testing, this internet to look things up. The files were all on paper, stored in folders that yellowed in hospital basements. A time when you could make documents disappear, change identities, manipulate records without much trouble, especially if you had a face identical to the person you wanted to replace. A time that favored the cruelest plan one sister could plot against another. Sometimes, I look at these old photos in the picture frame, the few I managed to recover after everything, and I still get chills. There's one from my wedding to Robert. I'm in white, smiling, thinking that happiness had knocked on my door to stay. I had just graduated as an accountant, the first woman in my family to get a college degree, a source of immense pride. Robert was an engineer, starting his career at a high-end residential construction firm. We met at a graduation party, and it was one of those things where you look at each other and you just know, you know. Little did I imagine that years later, this same man would stare at me as if I were a dangerous stranger, a raving lunatic trying to destroy his family. The doctors said I was lucky to have survived the accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. The car plunged almost 300 feet down the cliff after I was cut off by a pickup truck on the road. At the time, they thought it was a drunk driver who fled the scene. Today, I have my doubts. I spent almost 2 years in a deep coma, the kind where doctors give up and tell the family to prepare for the worst. Science said I wouldn't come back, but I did, and that's when the real nightmare began. I'll never forget the look on the nurse's face when I opened my eyes. The shock, then the astonishment. "Oh my God, she's back!" he yelled, running to call the doctor. I was confused, thinking I had only slept for a night, maybe a few days. My first question was about my children, Caleb, who must have been around 4, and Lucas, who hadn't even turned 2. The doctor came in, checked my pupils, asked questions to test my memory, and then, with that pitying look that doctors practice in medical school, he told me, "Mrs. Thompson, you were in a coma for a year and 10 months. Your family was notified, but your sister said she would come tomorrow." Sister? What sister? I didn't have a sister. I grew up as an only child. I thought it was a mix-up, that they had confused my chart with another patient's, but no. The doctor insisted that my twin sister had been visiting me regularly. She brought news of my children, of my husband. "She's identical to you. It's impressive," he commented, as if it were a trivial thing. Such a seemingly trivial remark, but for Josephine, it was a devastating blow. A twin sister she never knew existed has suddenly appeared and is now holding her fate in her hands. What really happened during the nearly 2 years she was in a coma? Will Josephine be able to find the answers? That was the first punch to the gut, the first of many to come. I discovered I had been transferred to a hospital in Bakersfield, far from Malibu, where I lived, at the family's request, according to the documents. Why would they take me so far away? It made no sense. Robert would never do that. When I was well enough to stand, I convinced a nurse to let me use the phone. I called my home. A voice identical to mine answered. I froze. When I asked for Robert, she hesitated and then said, "This is she, Josephine." I hung up, trembling. I managed to convince a doctor to discharge me early, saying my family would pick me up at the bus station. I lied. I took the little money the nurse had lent me, bought a ticket, and returned to Malibu alone, still weak, confused, trying to understand what was happening. It was like waking up in a parallel world, where everything looked the same, but nothing was as it should be. I arrived at my house. It was a Saturday afternoon. I remember the garden I cared for, so lovingly looked different, with plants I had never chosen. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart nearly pounding out of my chest. The door opened, and there I was. I mean, not me, but someone with my face, my hair, wearing my clothes. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. She turned pale for a second, then forced a smile and yelled, "My God, you woke up? Robert, come here. A miracle has happened." Robert appeared at the door with Caleb clinging to his leg and Lucas in his arms. My husband, my children, my family. When they saw me, their eyes widened in astonishment. Caleb hid behind his father in fear. Lucas started to cry. And Robert looked from me to her, and from her to me, as if he were seeing a ghost. Then he did what destroyed me inside. He instinctively took a step back and pulled the boys closer to her, to that stranger who had my face. Perhaps there is no greater pain than being rejected by the ones you love most, to be seen as a dangerous stranger. In that moment, Josephine didn't just lose a house. She was slowly being erased from her own life. And the real plot was only just beginning to unfold. I know what you're probably thinking. How could a husband not recognize his own wife? But you have to understand, profound exhaustion and fear can cloud a man's judgment. Sometimes, a perfectly crafted lie is easier to accept than a horrifying truth, a truth that would tear apart the very world he was trying to hold together. "Come in, let's talk," she said, all polite, as if I were just any visitor and not the owner of the house. I entered what was my home, now filled with objects I didn't recognize, photos on the walls I didn't remember taking. In the living room, she hugged me in front of everyone, whispering in my ear, low enough for only me to hear, "You should have stayed asleep." An icy chill ran down my spine. I pulled away. The boys were still scared, clinging to her. Robert looked like he had seen a ghost. I tried desperately to explain. I told them who I was. I talked about the accident, the coma, the hospital in Bakersfield. I talked about our children, our marriage. I mentioned memories, dates, intimate moments that only Robert and I had lived. But for every memory I brought up, she had an explanation, a way of saying I was confused, that they were delusions. "The doctor already warned us this could happen," she said, looking at Robert with a pitying expression. "She has severe brain damage, poor thing. She thinks she's someone else." That's when she showed the documents. Medical reports, which I would find out years later were forged, stating that I had a history of mental instability before the accident, letters supposedly written by me talking about visions and identity confusion, a file from a psychiatrist I had never visited. Everything perfectly crafted, as if someone had planned it for years, just waiting for the right moment to use it, which, from what I understood later, was exactly what happened. Robert was torn, of course. Deep down, I think he knew who was who. There are things a husband recognizes, right? But he also had the children to think about, the stability of the family, the scandal it would cause. And she had been there for almost 2 years while I slept, taking care of my children, being a wife to my husband, managing the accounting firm I had opened. Too perfect, too convenient. When he finally spoke, it was like a sentence. "I think you should seek medical help. We can pay for the treatment, but you can't stay here. The children are scared." I screamed, I cried, I begged. I called the boys by the nicknames only I used. Caleb even looked at me differently for a second, as if something had clicked, but he was a child, barely 6 years old. How was he supposed to understand? Veronica, it was only later that I found out her name called the police. She said I was a disturbed woman harassing her family. The sheriff's deputies arrived, saw 2 identical women, one hysterical me and the other calm, with documents, a husband, and children by her side. Guess who they believed? I was dragged out of my own house under the curious gazes of the neighbors. In that moment, I didn't just lose a house. I became a ghost, an invisible person in the midst of my own life. Perhaps there is no pain quite like being erased while you are still existing, still breathing, right before the eyes of those you love most. A scandal that became gossip for months in the neighborhood. The crazy woman who thought she was Mrs. Thompson, so similar she could fool anyone. I spent the night in a cell at the station until a social worker helped me find a spot in a shelter. I had returned from the limbo of near death only to become a homeless person, a nameless, pastless, familyless woman. Josephine Sage Thompson had vanished from the world, replaced by someone who no one, not even me, knew who she was. But hold on, before I jump straight to the end, I have to start this story from the very beginning of my life. Otherwise, you won't understand how I ended up in this whole mess. Willow Creek. Ah, my Willow Creek of the 1952nd. A town that seemed made of stone lace and old stories. I grew up running on those cobblestone slopes that shone after the rain, between colonial houses with blue windows that creaked with the mountain wind. The scent of Willow Creek is stuck with me forever. A mix of roasted coffee in the mornings, the incense from the Baroque churches, and that sweet perfume of ripe plums falling from the backyards. Our house was near the Rosary Church, a simple little house with wooden plank floors that sang when you stepped on them. Dad was a civil servant, worked at the city hall, a quiet man who spoke little but smiled with his eyes. Mom sewed for others. She had one of those pedal-powered singer machines in the corner of the living room. The little noise of the machine was the soundtrack of my childhood. Tech, tech, until late at night. Life was simple, without luxury, but there was never a lack of food or affection. I was an only child, which gave me a pleasant solitude at times and very special attention from my parents. The mornings began with Mom calling, "Josephine, honey, the oatmeal is on the table," and the smell of cinnamon spreading through the house. On Sunday afternoons after Mass, Dad would take me for vanilla soft serve in the little square. It was the kind of ice cream that melted fast and ran down your fingers, creating that fun rush to lick it before it dripped on your Sunday dress. At night, I listened to the stories my Grandma Rose told, of ghosts, of slaves who had hidden diamonds in ancient times, of restless souls who came back to settle scores. Little did I know that a soul would one day return to settle scores with me, and not from the other world, but from the same blood. It was when I was 16 that the first sign appeared, like a snake hidden among the stones. I was helping Mom tidy up some old things in the attic, dusty boxes that no one had touched in years. I found a yellowed shoebox, the kind for storing important documents. Inside, among certificates and old papers, I found a hospital document yellowed with time. I read it distractedly until my eye caught a word that made my heart leap. Twins, it said there, in black and white. Birth of identical twins, the 12th of March, 1950, my birthday. I stared at it without understanding, thinking I had misread it, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Mom," I called, my voice trembling. "What's this about twins?" She came quickly, as if she'd been stung by a wasp. When she saw the paper in my hand, her face wilted like a flower without water. She snatched the paper from me with a harshness I had never seen before. "It's nothing, girl. A hospital error. You were born alone. Can't you see you're an only child?" But her eyes couldn't look at me directly, and her hands trembled like banana leaves in the wind. Sometimes, the clumsiest lie is the most revealing truth. And for young Josephine, this truth unlocked a lifelong search, one that no one could have guessed would lead to such a terrible tragedy. Let's follow along and see how her journey begins. I insisted for days. I pursued the subject like a dog with a bone. Until one night, after Dad had gone to sleep, Mom sat with me on the back porch. The faint light of the lamp filled her face with shadows as she began to speak. It was the hardest time of our lives, Josephine. Your father had lost his job. I was bedridden after a difficult birth, unable to sew. 2 more mouths to feed. She stopped, swallowed hard. The nun at the hospital said she knew a couple from New York, wealthy people who couldn't have children. It was the most painful decision, but we gave your little sister up for adoption. The world seemed to stop spinning at that moment. I had a twin sister, identical to me, somewhere out there, breathing, growing, living a life completely different from mine. Someone with my face, my eyes, maybe even my mannerisms. It was as if a part of me that I didn't even know was missing suddenly started to ache like a bad tooth. How could you hide this from me my whole life? I asked, hot tears streaming down my face. It was for the best, Mom replied with the pained certainty of someone who had spent years convincing herself of it. Why know about someone you were never going to meet? It was just needless suffering. But for me, it wasn't needless suffering. It was part of my history, my blood, my identity. That night, lying in bed, I imagined what this sister would be like. If she liked the same things I did, if she had the same fears, if she also got a dimple on her left side when she smiled, if she had ever felt that inexplicable emptiness that sometimes gripped me for no reason. I began a search that lasted my entire adolescence. I gathered clues like looking for a needle in a haystack. I found out her name was Veronica, that she had been adopted by a couple with the last name Davenport, industrialists from New York. I tried writing letters that were returned unanswered. When I turned 18, I took some money I had saved and went to New York, determined to find this Davenport couple. It was a wasted trip. New York was too big a city, with too many people, and I was a girl from a small town with no connections. I came back frustrated, but I didn't give up. My parents got nervous with my searching. Let it go, girl. It's water under the bridge, Dad would say, slapping the newspaper on the table. That family probably doesn't even want contact. They were the ones who demanded secrecy in the adoption, Mom would add. Over time, I kept that search more to myself, not talking about it so much, but never abandoning it. Sometimes I thought that maybe she was also looking for me from the other side of this story broken in half. Life went on. Despite that hole that had opened inside me, I was the first girl in the family to go to college. I graduated in accounting, at a time when a woman with a diploma was almost a circus curiosity in a small town. The men would turn up their noses when I said my profession. The ladies would whisper that I would end up a spinster for being too educated, but I had determination to spare. I opened a small office on the main square, and slowly the local merchants, suspicious at first, became my clients. It was at a college graduation party that I met Robert. He was finishing his civil engineering degree in Los Angeles. He had come to Willow Creek for work. Our eyes met across the hall, and it was that thing you read about in novels and think is a poet's invention. Time stopped, the world disappeared, and it was just him there with that half-smile and honey-colored eyes that seemed to see right into my soul. That night, we danced until our shoes hurt our feet. We talked until our voices were hoarse. He went back to LA the next day, but fate had already tied its knot. Robert would show up in Willow Creek whenever he could, with increasingly flimsy excuses about work in the region. We would walk through the old town, sit on the park benches, make plans looking at the stars that shone brighter in the mountains. 6 months later, he proposed to me under the town square clock, the most romantic spot in town. I said, yes, of course. How could I not? He was everything I could dream of. Intelligent, hardworking, with that calm demeanor that soothed my restless soul. We got married in a simple ceremony at the Carmel Church. I wore a white dress that Mom sewed for weeks. He was in a navy blue suit that made him look like a movie star. We moved to Malibu soon after, where Robert had gotten a good job with a construction company. The big city scared me at first, the noise, the rush of people, the crowded buses, but I soon found my place. I got a job at a large accounting firm. I made a name for myself, gained my own clients. After 2 years, I opened my own business. The Thompson accounting office started small, in a rented room downtown, but it grew, gaining respect. Caleb was born 5 years into our marriage, a strong-willed boy with his father's eyes and my stubborn chin. A difficult birth, 18 hours of pain, but the moment they placed that little red, wrinkled bundle in my arms, I forgot everything. 2 years later, Lucas came, faster, easier, as if he were in a hurry to get into the world. Our family was complete. We bought a beautiful house in a tree-lined neighborhood, with a yard for the boys to run in, large bedrooms, and a porch where I liked to have coffee on Sunday mornings, listening to the sound of birds and my children's laughter. Life was good, you know? It was the kind of happiness you don't even notice while you're living it, because it seems natural. It seems like it will always be there. Robert was climbing the career ladder. I had my thriving business. The boys were growing up healthy and smart. On weekends, we would fill up the car and go to the countryside to show the boys the historic towns, the mountain waterfalls, the stories of America that the books don't quite tell. It was a simple but complete life. The kind of life you never imagined could be snatched from you from one day to the next. It was about 6 months before the accident that I started to feel that strange thing, an odd sensation of being watched. You know when you feel a chill on the back of your neck, as if someone is staring at you? It was that, but all the time. At first, I thought it was nonsense. Fatigue, maybe. The office was full of clients. The boys demanded attention. The routine was heavy. It's normal to feel these things, I thought. But the feeling grew stronger. I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near my house or the office. Once, I could have sworn I saw someone taking pictures of our house, but when I called Robert to see, there was no one there. Another time, answering the phone at the office, I heard breathing on the other end, a heavy silence before they hung up. I mentioned it to Robert, who thought I was getting paranoid. It's the pressure of work, Josephine. You need to rest more. Until one day, leaving the supermarket, I had the strong impression of seeing someone who looked a lot like me across the street. When I looked again, there was no one there. That sent a chill down my spine, like a bad premonition. Do you believe in intuition? At that time, I felt something was wrong, that someone was watching me, but I ignored it. The accident happened on a Friday afternoon. I had gone to Willow Creek to sort out some office matters and visit my parents. I was driving back alone on the Pacific Coast Highway, that winding road that snakes through hills covered with wildflowers and eucalyptus trees. The sky was such an intense blue it almost hurt to look at, and I was driving peacefully, listening to a music program on the radio, thinking about the dinner I would make for the boys when I got home. It happened on a sharp curve. A dark pickup truck suddenly appeared in the oncoming lane, coming straight at me. I remember yanking the steering wheel hard, trying to avoid the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt. The truck didn't hit me, but it forced me off the road. I remember the world spinning as the car tumbled down the cliff. 1, 2, 3 tumbles, the glass shattering, the metal twisting. I remember the smell of gasoline, the taste of blood in my mouth, and then nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. A coma isn't like they show in the movies, you know? It's not a complete blackout. It's more like being trapped in a dark place, where fragments of the outside world sometimes reach you. I would hear distant voices, feel when they changed the sheets, when they turned me in bed to prevent bed sores. Sometimes I would hear someone crying near me. I later found out they were nurses moved by my case. I couldn't react. I couldn't open my eyes or move a finger, but a part of me was there, conscious, floating in that limbo between life and death. Time doesn't exist in a coma. I can't say if days or years passed. It was a strange state where memories and dreams mixed. Sometimes I was in Willow Creek, a child again, running through the hills. Other times I was at home, smelling the scent of my children's hair when I hugged them before bed. And there were moments of frightening clarity, when I understood perfectly that I was trapped inside my own body, unable to communicate with the outside world. There were also the visits. I didn't see who entered the room, of course, but I felt presences. Some brought peace. I believe they were the kind nurses, maybe my parents. Others brought a heavy feeling, a cold that spread through the room. There was one presence in particular that gave me chills even in that state. Someone who would stand by my bed for a long time in silence, just watching. Today I know who it was, and I know they weren't there out of concern or affection. One of the strangest things was hearing conversations as if I were underwater. The words came distorted, incomplete. State, no improvement, prepare, turn off the machines. I remember fighting with all my strength when I heard that, screaming inside, desperate. I'm here, I'm alive. But no one could hear me. I was trapped in a body that didn't respond, like a butterfly inside a concrete cocoon. And then, one day, I felt something different, a kind of strength growing inside me, like dammed water seeking a path. I began to concentrate on moving a finger, just one. I focused all my energy on that minimal movement days, weeks, maybe, of frustrated attempts, until one day I felt it. The little finger of my left hand trembled, an almost imperceptible movement, but for me, it was like moving a mountain. After that, every day was a small victory. One more finger, the whole hand, the arm, and finally, the eyes. Opening my eyes after almost 2 years was like being born again. The light hurt me like needles, so intense that tears streamed involuntarily. The world was blurry, out of focus. Slowly, the shapes began to take form. A white ceiling, pale green walls, a window with beige curtains, a hospital room, but not the hospital in Los Angeles where I should have been. A strange, unknown place. That's when the nurse came in and saw me awake, his shock, the shout calling for the doctor. And then the questions began, and with them, the terrible realization that something very wrong had happened while I was sleeping. Something that would change my life forever, in a way I could never have imagined, not even in my worst nightmares. Something that had started long before the accident, maybe even before my birth, when 2 paths diverged and a twin sister disappeared from my life only to return decades later, not to find me, but to replace me. The first thing I felt when I opened my eyes was a shock of brightness that seemed to want to pierce my retinas. I blinked several times, trying to understand where I was. The ceiling was white, but I didn't recognize the water stains in the right corner. It wasn't the hospital in Los Angeles where I should have been after the accident. The walls were a faded green I had never seen before. Even the smell was different. A mix of cheap disinfectant and hospital food, which was not the same as at UCLA Medical Center, where Robert would certainly have taken me. Where am I? I managed to babble, my voice coming out like sandpaper from disuse. My throat felt like it was lined with sand. A young nurse I had never seen before dropped the clipboard he was holding when he heard me speak. "Holy Mother of God! She's awake," he yelled, running to the door. "Dr. Martin, get over here. The patient in 204 is awake." I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't obey properly. I was too thin, too weak, as if my muscles had turned to jelly. My legs didn't respond as they should. My arms felt like they weighed a ton. There were tubes and wires connected to me, a monitor beeping beside me. When I tried to speak again, the voice came out a little less hoarse. "My children, where is my husband?" A doctor entered hastily. Graying hair, thick-rimmed glasses, an impeccably white coat. I didn't know him either. He checked my pupils with a small flashlight, checked the monitor, asked basic questions. My name, date of birth, if I knew where I was. I answered 2 out of 3. I had no idea where I was. Mercy General Hospital in Bakersfield, he informed me, writing something on his clipboard. Bakersfield was over 100 miles from Malibu. How had I ended up so far away? "What day is it?" I asked, confused. I thought maybe I had been unconscious for a few days, maybe weeks. The doctor exchanged a look with the nurse before answering. One of those looks doctors have when they're about to deliver difficult news. "Mrs. Thompson, today is the 17th of March, 1982, he said calmly, as if teaching a child. "You had a serious accident and were in a deep coma for 1 year and 10 months. The floor dropped out from under me. Almost 2 years. It wasn't possible. Caleb would be almost 6 now. Lucas, almost 4. They had grown up without me, had birthdays, Christmases, first words, discoveries, and Robert, How had he managed alone, taking care of the children and working? My office, my clients, everything must be lost. Does my family know I'm awake? I want to see my children, my husband, I begged, trying to sit up in bed, ignoring the dizziness that made the room spin. The doctor gently pushed me back against the pillows. Your family was notified as soon as you started showing signs of improvement a few days ago. Your sister said she would come tomorrow. Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. Sister? What sister? I didn't have a sister, or rather, I did, but no one knew about her. Not even she knew about me, probably. How could they be talking to my twin sister, who was given up for adoption at birth? Doctor, there must be a mistake, I said, feeling my heart race. I don't have a sister. I'm an only child. The doctor frowned, confused. You have a twin sister, identical to you. She visits you regularly, brings news of your children, your husband. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. In fact, she was the one who requested your transfer to this hospital. The room started spinning. It made no sense. How could a sister I had never met, who I didn't even know existed, as far as I knew, be visiting me, making decisions for me, keeping me away from my family? Something was very wrong, and the more I thought about it, the more terrible it seemed. I need to use a phone, I demanded. I need to speak to my husband now. The doctor nodded to the nurse, who brought a telephone with a long cord. With trembling fingers, I dialed my home number, which, thank God, I still remembered. It rang 3 times before someone answered. Hello? It was a woman's voice. My voice. A shiver ran up my spine. I want to speak to Robert Thompson, I managed to say. My mouth is dry as paper. He's not here at the moment. Who's calling? The woman on the other end asked, with my tone, my intonation, as if I were listening to a recording of myself. Who is this? I asked, feeling bile rise in my throat. It's Josephine, his wife. Who is this? I slammed the phone down, almost knocking the device over. My brain couldn't process what was happening. Someone, my twin sister, by all indications was in my house, answering my phone, introducing herself as me, living my life while I was trapped in that hospital bed. In the days that followed, I pieced together more of that macabre puzzle. I found out I had been transferred to Bakersfield 8 months after the accident, at the family's request. The doctors constantly talked about my sister, who came to visit me, brought pictures of my children, updated the team on my medical history before the accident. Even more frightening was discovering that my parents had died just a few months after my accident. Dad of a heart attack, Mom of pneumonia soon after. I couldn't even say goodbye to them. And now there was no one who could confirm who I really was. No one, except my husband and my children. I had to go home. I had to confront this imposter. I had to get my life back. I convinced the doctor to discharge me earlier than he wanted, assuring him that my sister would pick me up at the bus station in Los Angeles. It was a lie, of course, but I needed to get out of that hospital before she showed up to keep me trapped there. A nurse who had grown fond of me lent me some money. You can pay me back when you can, dear. And she helped me get to the Bakersfield bus station. The bus ride was torture. 6 hours bumping along the highway, still weak, with aches all over my body, watching the world go by through the window. A world that had kept spinning while I was in suspension. Malibu looked the same and completely different when I finally arrived. New buildings, busier streets, buses with different colors. Or maybe it was me who was different, looking at everything with eyes that had seen death up close. I took a taxi home with the little money I had left. The driver kept looking at me in the rearview mirror, probably noticing how battered I looked, thin, with deep dark circles and a poorly cut hair. I didn't care. All I could think about was hugging my children, kissing my husband, reclaiming the life that was stolen from me for almost 2 years. When the taxi stopped in front of my house, I felt my heart almost leap out of my chest. The garden was different. Roses where I had planted sunflowers, a swing hanging from a tree that wasn't there before. But it was my house, no doubt. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Then I walked to the door and rang the doorbell, my legs weak with nerves. The door opened and there she was. Me, but not me. My face, my eyes, my body, only well-fed, well-dressed, well cared for. Hair in the same cut I used to have before the accident, the same small wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. For a moment, it was like looking into a distorted mirror, a mirror that showed how I should have looked if I hadn't spent the last 2 years wasting away in a hospital bed. I saw the shock on her face, a flash of panic that quickly turned into a false smile. "My God, you're awake. Robert, come here. A miracle has happened." She shouted into the house, acting like a happy sister at the other's recovery. But her eyes said something else. They were cold, calculating, assessing the situation quickly. Robert appeared at the door with Caleb clinging to his leg and Lucas in his arms. My heart clenched seeing how big they were, how they had changed. Caleb had lost his front baby teeth. Lucas was no longer a chubby baby, but a little boy with curly hair. I had to restrain myself from lunging forward and snatching them from the arms of that imposter. Robert's eyes widened in absolute shock. He looked from me to her, from her to me, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. The boys reacted with fear. Caleb hiding behind his father, Lucas starting to cry. That broke me inside. My own children didn't recognize me. They were afraid of me. "Come in. Let's talk," she said with a forced politeness, opening the door wider. I entered my own home like a visitor, noticing changes everywhere. New furniture, different colors on the walls, photos on the shelves. I didn't recognize photos of her with my husband, with my children, living moments that should have been mine. When we reached the living room, she hugged me in front of everyone, a theatrical welcome hug. But her lips brushed my ear, and she whispered so low that only I could hear, "You should have stayed asleep." A shiver ran down my spine. Those words, spoken with such venom, confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't opportunism. It was something planned, calculated. I pushed her away as if I had been shocked. The boys were still clinging to her, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. Robert seemed to be in a state of shock, unable to form words. I had to make them understand. I had to prove who I was. "Robert, it's me, Josephine," I began, my voice trembling with emotion. "I had an accident on the PCH. I was in a coma for almost 2 years. They transferred me to a hospital in Bakersfield without my consent. This woman is my twin sister, who was given up for adoption when we were born. I don't know how or why, but she has assumed my identity while I was unconscious." Robert looked at me with an expression that mixed doubt and horror. I continued desperately. "Remember our first trip together to Carmel by the Sea? We stayed in that inn near the Mission San Carlos Borromeo. It rained the whole weekend, and we didn't even leave the room. Remember you proposed to me under the clock in the square in Willow Creek? And your knee got all scraped because you slipped on the stones? Remember the secret room we built in the attic, where we kept your grandfather's things that no one else could see?" I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. They were intimate memories, things only the two of us knew. But then she intervened, her voice calm and controlled. "Robert, remember what Dr. Evans said? About the delusions I might have if I woke from the coma, how I might confuse reality with fantasy?" She looked at me with false compassion. "Poor thing, she's confused. She thinks she's someone else." "This is crazy," I shouted. "I am Josephine Sage Thompson. I was born in Willow Creek on the 12th of March, 1950. My parents were Henry and Mary Sage. I graduated in accounting from UCLA. I have 2 sons, Caleb and Lucas, and I have been married to Robert Thompson for 8 years. She smiled, that condescending smile one gives to children or madmen. "I know all those details too, dear. We're identical twins, remember? We grew up apart, but I always knew about you. I used to visit you secretly in Willow Creek when we were teenagers. It's natural that I know things about your life. That caught me by surprise." So, it was her I felt watching me during my adolescence? That feeling of being watched wasn't paranoia. But how did she know about me, when my own parents did everything to hide her existence? Before I could question further, she went to a drawer and pulled out a folder. "Robert, I think we should show her. Maybe it will help with the mental confusion." She opened the folder, and began to spread documents on the coffee table. Medical reports, letters, prescriptions for psychiatric drugs. Josephine always had problems, she explained to me, as if recalling something I should know. Episodes of identity, confusion, delusions. The doctors diagnosed her with dissociative disorder years ago. It was under control with medication, but the accident, well, the brain trauma made it all worse. I looked at those papers, horrified. They were all fake. They had to be. I never had mental problems, never consulted psychiatrists, never took controlled medication, but they looked so authentic. Official letterheads, signatures, dates that went back years before the accident. "This is a lie!" I screamed, throwing the papers on the floor. "This is all forged, Robert. You've known me for almost 10 years. I've never had mental problems." Robert looked completely lost, looking from me to her, from her to the documents. The boys started crying harder, frightened by my screams. She hugged them protectively, looking at me as if I were a threat. "I think you need to calm down," she said softly. "The doctor warned us you might get agitated. Maybe we should call Dr. Evans." "There is no Dr. Evans," I yelled, feeling like I was losing control, which only made my situation worse. "Robert, for God's sake, it's me. Look at me. How can you not recognize your own wife?" He finally spoke, his voice choked. I don't know what to say. You're identical." "And Josephine," he pointed to the imposter, "has been here all this time, taking care of the boys, the house, the office. She knows our whole routine, our stories. Because she studied me," I shouted desperately. "She watched me for years, planned all this." That's when she did something that completely turned the tables against me. She picked up the phone and, right in front of me, called the police. "Please, come quickly. There's a disturbed woman in my house. She's scaring my children. Yes, she looks a lot like me. She's my twin sister who just got out of a psychiatric hospital." She continued to invent an elaborate story about how I had a history of mental illness, how I had escaped from the hospital, how I was having a psychotic break, thinking I was her. When she hung up, she stared at me with a look that mixed triumph and threat. "You'd better leave now before things get worse. The police are on their way, and it won't be pretty if they find you here causing this commotion." Robert finally intervened. "Wait, we don't need to involve the police. We can handle this civilly." He turned to me, his eyes full of doubt. "Look, I don't know what's happening here, but the boys are scared. Maybe it's best if you go for now, until we can understand the situation better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own husband asking me to leave my house while an imposter stayed with my family. "Robert, it's me," I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. "How can you not feel it? How can you look into my eyes and not recognize the woman you've slept with for years?" I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his face. For a second, I thought he was going to give in, that he would see the truth. But then, Caleb started crying louder, clinging to her legs. "Mommy, I'm scared." The sound of my son calling another woman mommy was like a knife to the heart. "Fine, I'll go," I said, momentarily defeated. "But this isn't over. I will prove who I am, Robert. And when you find out the truth, I hope you can forgive yourself for abandoning me when I needed you most." I staggered out the front door, my legs barely supporting me. The neighbors were already at their windows, curious about the commotion. I saw the sheriff's car turning the corner as I reached the sidewalk. I couldn't be caught there. With the fake documents she had, I would surely end up committed to some psychiatric clinic. I ran as fast as my debilitated body would allow, hiding in an alley when the deputies passed. The following weeks were hell on earth. No money, no documents. She had them all, no place to stay. I slept in shelters, on park benches, eventually in a cheap boarding house when I could scrape together a few bucks doing cleaning jobs. People looked at me with suspicion, a woman too thin, looking sick, saying things that sounded like madness. I quickly became the crazy lady of the neighborhood, the woman who claimed to be someone else. I tried to go back to my accounting office. It was another shock. My name was no longer on the door. Now it was Thompson and Davenport Accounting. Davenport, the last name of the family that adopted my sister. I went in anyway, determined. The receptionist almost fainted when she saw me. "Mrs. Thompson, but you just left for lunch." "I'm not the Josephine you know," I explained, trying to stay calm. "I am the real Josephine Thompson. The woman passing herself off as me is an imposter." The receptionist looked at me as if I had two heads. I insisted. "Please, tell me who started working here in the last 2 years. I need to talk to someone who knew the office before my accident." "Look, I think you need some help," she said, slowly reaching for the phone. "I'm going to call Mrs. Thompson. She'll know what to do." I ran out before she could complete the call. Another door closed. It seemed all paths were blocked. Veronica, I finally found out her full name. Veronica Davenport, through conversations with old neighbors, had thought of everything. She had inserted herself perfectly into my life, leaving no cracks for me to slip through. Rock bottom came 3 weeks after my return. I had managed to rent a tiny room in the back of a boarding house in the farthest neighborhood of the city. A damp place, with mold on the walls and a bed that was little more than an old mattress on the floor. I did laundry for others, cleaned where they would have me, anything to scrape together a few bucks for food and rent. The owner of the boarding house, Mrs. Gloria, a woman whose face was a roadmap of a hard life, was the only person who looked at me and saw a human being rather than a ghost or a madwoman. She never asked about my story, and I never offered it. But one evening, as I sat shivering in my room, more from despair than cold, she knocked softly and handed me a steaming bowl of soup. "I don't meddle in people's pasts," she said, her voice gruff but her eyes kind. "But I know a good soul when I see one. You work hard, you cause no trouble, and you carry a sadness too heavy for your shoulders. Whatever you're running from or running to, you're safe here." In that simple gesture, she gave me more than soup. She gave me back a piece of my humanity. She was the anchor that kept me from drifting away completely. Years began to blur into a monotonous cycle of survival. 1 year became 2, then 3. I learned the geography of the forgotten, the rhythms of a life lived in the margins. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own story, catching glimpses of my boys from across a schoolyard. My heart, a leaden weight in my chest. They were growing up in flashes, Caleb losing his baby teeth, Lucas's hair darkening from blonde to brown. Each sighting was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of the life that was happening without me. Frank and I worked slowly, painstakingly. Our investigation was a fragile tapestry woven from whispers, old files, and favors called in from the past. Some days, despair was a physical presence, whispering that it was a fool's errand. But then I would look at the faded locket with their baby photos, and the fire in me, though low, would refuse to die. I was no longer just fighting for a name or a house. I was fighting for the very truth of my existence. The years that followed were a study in invisibility. I learned to walk with my head down, to make myself small, to never meet anyone's gaze for too long. There is a peculiar kind of pain that comes from being erased. It's not a sharp, sudden agony, but a slow, grinding ache in the soul. I would stand across the street from the park, hidden by a tree, and watch my boys learn to ride their bikes. I saw Caleb score a goal in a soccer game, and Lucas hold his father's hand. Each milestone I witnessed from afar was both a treasure and a dagger to the heart. I didn't cry anymore. Tears were a luxury I had exhausted long ago. Instead, my grief solidified into a cold, hard resolve in the pit of my stomach. That resolve was all I had. One night, returning from a cleaning job, I found an abandoned newspaper on a park bench. In the society column, a photo caught my eye. Robert and Josephine, at a charity event, smiling, elegant. The caption read, "Engineer Robert Thompson and his wife Josephine of Thompson, Davenport Accounting, were the major donors of the evening." I tore the page from the newspaper and kept it in my pocket. Another piece of the puzzle of my stolen life. That night, alone in my miserable little room, looking at that newspaper photo, I hit the lowest point. I saw myself as others must see me. A disturbed woman, too thin, aged before her time, obsessed with an absurd story that no one believed. Maybe it would be easier to give up. Maybe I should accept this new reality, this new identity, or lack thereof. Who was I now, anyway? A shadow, a ghost of the woman I once was. I cried until I had no more tears, clutching the only object I still had from my previous life. A small locket with tiny photos of my children that I was wearing on the day of the accident, which a kind nurse had saved with my personal belongings. Looking at those little faces that would barely recognize mine now, I made a decision. I would not give up. No matter how long it took, how much effort it cost, I would prove the truth and get my life back. That night, lying on the thin mattress that made my back ache, I began to devise a plan. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but it was all I had left. I needed proof, allies, a strategy, and above all, I needed patience. The kind of patience only someone who has lost everything can have, because there is nothing left to lose. What I didn't know that dark night was that the battle would be even longer and more difficult than I imagined, that it would take years, decades, to assemble the pieces of that macabre puzzle, that the path back to my children would be paved with painful discoveries, unexpected betrayals, and unlikely alliances. But I also didn't know that somewhere in that twisted story, there were small rays of hope waiting for the right moment to shine. It was on my first Christmas alone that I decided I wasn't going to just cry in a corner anymore. I remember it like it was yesterday, sitting in that little room at Mrs. Gloria's boarding house, listening in the distance to the sound of families celebrating, children opening presents, a joy that only deepened my sadness. I stared out the narrow window, fireworks bursting in the sky, thinking about my boys, what presents they were getting, if they still believed in Santa Claus. It was there that something inside me hardened, like clay turning to brick in the fire. If no one believed me, I would have to find evidence so compelling that not even the most skeptical judge could deny it. I started at the beginning, the hospital. The day after Christmas, I took a bus to Bakersfield. I spent almost all the money I had saved from doing laundry, but I had to go back there to talk to the people who took care of me during the coma. Mercy General Hospital was quiet that week, between Christmas and New Year's, many employees on vacation, half-empty corridors. It was my luck. Without the usual hustle and bustle, I was able to move around more freely, looking for familiar faces. I first found Patricia, an older nurse who had been especially kind to me. She nearly fell over when she saw me. "My goodness, you're back? How are you?" I didn't even have to make up a story. I told her the truth, that I had woken from a coma to find someone had taken my identity, that I needed information about the time I spent there, about who visited me. At first, she was suspicious, of course, but there was something in my eyes, in my voice, in my sincere desperation that convinced her. "Look, I don't know if I can help much," she said, leading me to a staff break room, "but I remember there was a woman who used to visit you. She looked just like you, exactly the same. She said she was your twin sister, always came with documents, authorizations, everything in order." I asked her to remember more details. How often did this sister come? What did she do? Who did she talk to? "She came about once a month," Patricia said, frowning, trying to remember. "She would spend a long time alone with you in the room. Sometimes I'd hear her talking as if you could hear. She brought photos, showed them to you. And she spoke to the doctors, asking for information about my condition." Patricia nodded, confirming my suspicion. Veronica wasn't just pretending to be a concerned sister. She was gathering information, learning about my condition, perhaps even influencing my treatment. There was one strange thing, Patricia added, lowering her voice as if telling a secret. "One time I entered the room without knocking. She was there. It looked like she was trying on your clothes, you know, the ones that were stored since the accident, measuring them in front of the mirror. I thought it was weird at the time, but I figured, maybe it's a twin thing." This information was like gold to me. She wasn't just an opportunist taking advantage of my state. It was a meticulous plan executed over months, maybe years. Veronica was literally preparing to be me, studying every detail. In the following days, I interviewed more hospital staff. A security guard remembered her always arriving at the same time, when the shift change made the reception more chaotic. A cafeteria worker commented that the sister knew intimate details about me: tastes, habits, family stories. And then came the bombshell. An administrative clerk, Mr. Walter, who worked in the archives. "That woman, your sister. She requested several copies of your medical record," he said, scratching his graying chin. "She said it was to take to specialists in Los Angeles, but one day I caught her tampering with the original files. When I asked what she was doing, she said she had accidentally spilled coffee on a page and wanted to replace it. I found it too strange," I told my supervisor. After that, she never came to the archives section again. This was the proof I needed. Veronica had altered hospital documents, probably removing or adding information that would support her version of the story. I asked to see my medical record, but then I ran into bureaucracy, only with a court order or family authorization. And of course, according to the records, my family was precisely who I was trying to unmask. I returned to Malibu with some valuable information, but nothing concrete enough to prove my identity. I needed professional help. That's when I met Frank, a retired LAPD detective. I found him in a simple diner near the boarding house, where I sometimes went for coffee and toast on days I managed to save a few extra bucks. Frank was an old regular, always sitting on the same stool in the corner, observing everything with those small, attentive eyes. One day, gathering my courage, I sat next to him and blurted it out. "Have you ever investigated cases of identity theft?" He looked at me over his coffee cup, surprised by the direct approach. "Why? Someone steal yours?" That was my cue to pour out the whole story at once, unfiltered. I told him about the accident, the coma, the twin sister. I never knew how I lost my family, my business, my entire life. I thought he would laugh or call me crazy like everyone else, but Frank just listened in silence, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, exhausted, he simply said, "I'll help you, but it won't be quick or easy." I asked how much he charged. He shrugged. "Pay me when you can, or don't. I'm retired. I'm doing this more for the story. And there's something in your eyes that tells me you're not lying. Do you know that feeling? When you've been screaming into the void for so long, you start to wonder if you even have a voice anymore. And then one person turns and truly listens. His belief in me, just that tiny flicker of light, was what kept me from being completely swallowed by the darkness. That's how my partnership with Frank began. He wasn't some American movie detective with modern gadgets and flashy methods. He was an old cop with contacts, experience, and above all, patience. "Cases like yours aren't solved with dramatic confrontations," he would explain as we had coffee at the diner. "It's like fishing for a big fish. You prepare the right bait, cast the line in the right place, and you wait. Mostly, you wait." Our first target was the hospital records. Frank still had friends in the judiciary. He managed to get a court order. I don't know how. I never asked for details. To access my complete medical record at Mercy General Hospital, and there it was. Pages with visibly different handwriting, interspersed with the originals. Notes about a history of delusions and prior psychotic episodes that had been inserted later. And most importantly, the transfer request from Los Angeles to Bakersfield, signed by a certain Veronica Thompson, with a note, "Twin sister and legal guardian, due to spouse's incapacitation." She forged Robert's signature, I explained to Frank, showing him how the handwriting was different from my husband's real signature, which I knew so well. And she introduced herself as Veronica Thompson, using my married name, not her maiden or adoptive name. "That's document fraud," Frank noted in his worn little notebook. "But we still need more. Much more." He was right. A forged signature wasn't enough to prove such an elaborate scheme, especially against someone who now had money, connections, and an identical physical appearance to mine. The following months were of meticulous, silent work. Frank investigating, me doing odd jobs, cleaning, and doing laundry to survive. Slowly, we gathered more pieces. We discovered that Veronica had arrived in Malibu almost a year before my accident, renting a small apartment just a few blocks from my house. She had studied me, followed me, learned my routine. The accident on the PCH, which everyone thought was caused by a drunk driver who fled. Witnesses reported a dark pickup truck forcing cars off the road that day. a pickup truck very similar to the one a neighbor had seen parked near Veronica's apartment. She planned everything, I concluded, horrified. It wasn't opportunism. She caused the accident, waited for me to fall into a coma, and then took over my life. The question is why, Frank pondered, scratching his graying chin. What's the motive? Money? Envy? Some kind of revenge? That answer took longer to find. In the meantime, we achieved our first concrete victory, a DNA test. Frank had a friend in the crime lab who agreed to do the test off the books. We needed a sample from Veronica, of course. We got it when she went to get her hair cut at the beauty salon she frequented religiously, the same one I went to before the accident. The hairdresser, sympathetic to my story and the extra money Frank offered, saved some clippings for us. The result was what we already knew. We were identical twins, a 100% genetic match. But it was official proof on paper that contradicted the version Veronica told some acquaintances that I was just a woman who looked very similar, maybe a distant cousin with mental problems. While we accumulated evidence, I started observing Veronica from a distance. I would go in disguise to events where I knew she would be. I sat in cafes from where I could see the entrance of my old accounting office. Sometimes I would even take a bus past my old house, trying to catch a glimpse of my children playing in the garden. That's how I began to notice the small inconsistencies, the details she couldn't reproduce perfectly. At a farmer's market, I saw someone offer her a piece of pumpkin spice cake, my favorite since childhood. She accepted politely and ate it. But I'm allergic to the cinnamon that is always in that specific cake. At a Chamber of Commerce meeting I watched through the window, an old friend from Willow Creek greeted her warmly, recalling school stories. She smiled and agreed, but I never went to school with that man. He moved to Willow Creek after I had already left. They were small slips, insignificant to anyone who didn't know the truth. But to me, they were precious confirmations. Veronica might have studied my life, my preferences, my history, but there were limits to what she could know or pretend. Little things slipped through her fingers like water. One of the most painful discoveries came through Mrs. Margaret, an old neighbor from Willow Creek, whom I met by chance in Los Angeles visiting her daughter. When she saw me, she almost fainted, thinking she'd seen a ghost. I briefly explained the situation, and she, after the initial shock, revealed something that chilled me to the bone. Your parents knew, Josephine. At least your mother knew. Shortly before she passed away, she confided in me that she had received visits from a young woman identical to you, who claimed to be your twin sister given up for adoption. Your mother was scared. She thought it was divine punishment for having hidden the truth from you all those years. My own parents had seen Veronica, spoken with her, perhaps even told her intimate details of my childhood, things only they would know. The betrayal hurt like an open wound, but it also explained how Veronica had obtained such precise information about me, about my life in Willow Creek, about stories no one else knew. Time passed, and with it, my hopes of reclaiming my life as it was before began to wither. 5 years had passed since I woke from the coma. 5 years living in the shadows, watching my own life being lived by someone else from afar. My children were growing up. Caleb was already a preteen, Lucas not far behind. Sometimes I could see them leaving school or playing in the park from a distance, unable to hug them, unable to tell them who I was. The big breakthrough came from where I least expected it. On a rainy afternoon, someone knocked on the door of my little room at the boarding house. When I opened it, I almost fell backward. It was Caleb, my firstborn, now 11 years old, soaked with rain, his huge eyes studying me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Are you the woman who says you're my real mom?" he asked, his voice still childish but with a seriousness that broke my heart. I couldn't answer immediately, the emotion catching in my throat. I just nodded, my eyes filling with water. "Can I come in?" "It's raining hard," he added, practical as he always was, even as a little boy. I let him in, trembling with nerves. How had he found me? What did he want? Did Veronica know he was here? I offered him a hot chocolate, which he accepted. As I prepared it in the small electric kettle, he looked around, observing my simple little room, so different from the comfortable house where he lived. "How did you find me, Caleb?" I finally asked, placing the steaming mug in front of him. "Frank?" he replied simply. "He comes to my school. Sometimes he watches me from a distance. One day I confronted him. I thought he was a kidnapper or something. He told me about you. I was torn between thanking and cursing Frank later. He had never told me he was watching my children, let alone that he had spoken with them. But it was too late for that now. Why did you come to see me?" I asked, sitting in front of him, desperately wanting to touch him, to hug him, but restraining myself so as not to scare him. He took a sip of the chocolate before answering. "Strange things are happening, things that don't make sense." He began to list them. How his mother, Veronica, didn't know the name of the dog they had when he was a baby. How she didn't recognize the scar on his knee from when he fell from the tree. How she couldn't make the chocolate chip cookies the same way he remembered. "And there's the nightmare," he added, lowering his voice. "I always dream of someone calling me, a voice that sounds like hers, but isn't, a warmer voice, my voice." My son was dreaming of my voice. I had to hold back the tears with all my strength. "What do you want to know, Caleb?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "The truth. I want to know who you really are and who she is." I told him everything as simply and honestly as I could, adapting only the most disturbing details for his young ears. I told him about the twin sister I never knew, the accident, the coma, how Veronica took my identity. He listened to everything in silence, his eyes never leaving my face, as if searching for confirmation of the truth in it. When I finished, he was quiet for so long that I thought he hadn't believed me. Then, suddenly, he asked, "What was the name of my favorite blanket when I was a baby? The one I wouldn't let go of for anything." "Bluey," I answered without hesitation. "You wouldn't let anyone wash it. It started to smell musty. One day I had to wait for you to fall asleep to steal it and wash it secretly. You cried so much when you realized it was clean that I had to rub it in the garden to get it a little dirty and bring the smell back." His eyes filled with tears. "It's you," he said simply, and then he did something I had waited 5 long years for. He came to me and hugged me tightly, as if he wanted to make up for all the lost time in that single gesture. A child's simple hug can be more powerful than 1,000 words. It gave Josephine back her identity as a mother. This was the first glimmer of light after so many dark days, the most precious ally she could have. With Caleb's help, will this battle finally come to an end? That hug. It was more than just warmth. It was validation. It was the bond that no lie could ever sever. In that moment, I wasn't the madwoman or the imposter anymore. I was his mother, and that alone was enough to keep me fighting. I don't know how long we stayed like that, hugging, crying silently. When we finally separated, we made a plan. He wouldn't tell anyone about our meeting, not Lucas, who was too young to keep a secret, nor his father, who Caleb didn't know which side he would take. But he would come to see me whenever he could slip away and bring me news, photos, pieces of the life I had lost. And so began our secret relationship. Once or twice a month, Caleb would pretend he was going to a friend's house to study or that he had an extra activity at school, and he would come to see me. He brought photos, told stories, asked questions about the past that Veronica couldn't answer correctly. Over time, he started bringing small gifts. A drawing from Lucas, a school graduation photo, a voice recording of him reading a story so I could listen when I missed him. It was through Caleb that I learned more about the life Veronica was living, as if it were mine. The accounting firm was thriving. She had a talent for business, I couldn't deny that. She and Robert seemed to have a functional marriage, though not as passionate as ours had been. The boys were well cared for, went to good schools, had everything they needed materially. "But she's not you," Caleb would always say. "She tries, but she's not." When Caleb turned 16, he made a decision that surprised me. He told Lucas everything, who was already 14. I was terrified, certain that the younger one wouldn't keep the secret, that he would tell Veronica that everything we had built over the last 5 years would be destroyed. But I underestimated my youngest. Lucas not only believed it, he already had his own suspicions. "She never calls me Deuce," he explained when we finally met. "Everyone calls me that, except her. And you called me that as soon as you saw me." It was true. Deuce had been his nickname since he was a baby, Because he was so restless, we used to say, "My God, this boy never stops." Over time, it just became Deuce. A silly, familiar, intimate nickname that Veronica never used, probably because no one outside the immediate family would know it. With both my sons now knowing the truth, our clandestine relationship became both easier and harder. Easier because I had more opportunities to see them, harder because the risk of being discovered increased. They wanted to spend more time with me, to get to know the real mother they had lost for so many years. But Veronica started to get suspicious of the frequent outings, the stories that didn't line up perfectly. That's when Caleb, at 18, decided to confront his father. Without consulting me, without warning, he simply sat down with Robert one night and poured out everything he knew, the secret visits, the evidence we had accumulated, the inconsistencies in Veronica's behavior. Robert listened to it all in silence, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't react, Mom, Caleb told me later, frustrated. He just listened to everything and said he needed to think. But the strange thing is, he didn't seem surprised at all. 3 days later, Robert showed up at the boarding house. He was older, with gray hairs at his temples, deeper wrinkles around his eyes. But he was still the man I fell in love with decades ago. We looked at each other in silence for a long moment, decades of unsaid history between us. "You always knew, didn't you?" I finally asked, my voice almost failing. He nodded, his eyes lowered, unable to meet mine. Not from the beginning, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. But after a few months, there were things, small things that were just wrong. The way she made coffee, how she slept on my side of the bed, things you notice when you've shared a life with someone. "And you did nothing?" The words tore from my throat, raw with years of pent-up betrayal. "You knew, Robert. You felt it." I tried to ignore it, he admitted, finally looking at me, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was almost tangible. She was so convincing. She showed up a few months after the accident, when I was drowning. She had documents, birth certificates, stories about your childhood. She said your mother had told her everything, that they had reconnected. And the hospital in Bakersfield? I pressed, needing to hear him say it. She said it was a specialized facility. Better for long-term comas. I was exhausted, Josephine. I was trying to keep the boys' lives normal, to keep my job, to not fall apart. The idea of help, of another family member to share the burden. I was weak. And I made the worst choice of my life. He choked on the last words. I chose the easier path, and I have lived with that cowardice every single day since. His cowardice had wounded me for years. But hearing him confess, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could choose the path of vengeance, or the path of healing for my children. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in destroying your enemy, but in choosing peace for the ones you love. Too late for what, Robert? To save your wife, the mother of your children. The hurt of decades was in my voice, impossible to hide. To undo the choice I had made, he replied, his gaze finally meeting mine. When you showed up that day, I was in shock. I couldn't process it. But the boys were already calling her Mom. The office was running under her management. Our life had moved on. Choosing you meant admitting I had been living a lie for almost 2 years. It meant traumatizing the boys. It meant a scandal that would destroy our reputations, our businesses. So you chose the lie, I concluded bitterly. I chose stability, he corrected, without much conviction. Stability or cowardice? Sometimes the line between them is so thin, and one wrong choice can cause decades of pain. Will Robert's late confession soothe Josephine's heartache, or just make it worse? Let's see how she confronts this truth. And later, well, she needed me more than you did. What do you mean? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You were always strong, Josephine, independent. You solved your own problems, ran your business. You didn't need anyone to save you. She was different, more fragile, more dependent. She said she'd had a hard life, that she had finally found happiness, that she wouldn't survive if she lost it all. Pure manipulation, of course. But it worked on Robert. Men like him need to feel needed, protective. Veronica played that game perfectly while I was too busy building a career, raising children, being independent. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, he continued. But I needed you to know it wasn't for lack of love. It was out of cowardice. Maybe fear of the scandal, of what people would say, of the effect on the boys. And by the time I finally worked up the courage to confront the situation, years had passed. It seemed too late to fix. I didn't answer. What could I say? That it was okay, that I understood, that I forgave him. It wasn't true. The pain of his betrayal was almost as great as Veronica's. Almost. The boys want you back in our lives, he said finally, officially. They love you, even though they've only known you for a short time, and they deserve to have their real mother. And Veronica? I asked. What happens to her in this scenario? Robert sighed deeply. She doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know the boys have found out the truth. I think deep down she always feared this day, because she's extremely possessive of them, controls their every move. But the decision is yours, Josephine. If you want to fight in court, expose everything, legally reclaim your identity, I will support you. I will testify in your favor. It's the least I can do after everything. I was silent for a long time, pondering. I had spent years dreaming of this moment, of revenge, of justice being served. I had accumulated evidence, built a solid case. I could destroy Veronica, reclaim my name, my legal identity, maybe even part of the assets that were rightfully mine. But at what cost? A lawsuit would be long, public, scandalous. It would expose my children to a terrible trauma. Discovering that the woman who raised them for so many years was a fraud, a criminal. It would create a division in the family that might never heal. And after so many years, what would I really recover? The office was no longer the one I built. The house had been sold, replaced by a mansion in a wealthy neighborhood that was never my home. Robert? Well, Robert had made his choice a long time ago. I'm not going to expose Veronica publicly, I finally decided. I'm not going to fight in court or create a scandal, but I want my children back in my life. I want to be able to see them openly, to build a relationship with them. I want them to know the truth, even if the rest of the world doesn't. Robert seemed relieved, but confused. How would we do that? Veronica would never accept. She'll have to accept, I replied with a firmness that came from years of silent struggle. Because the alternative is me exposing everything I've discovered over the years. All the evidence, all the fraud, all the lies. She can continue to be Josephine Thompson to the world. She can keep the social status, the office, even you. But my children are non-negotiable. The confrontation with Veronica happened a week later. Robert arranged it at their house, the house that was never mine. When I arrived, she was already in the living room, pale as paper, her eyes glazed with hatred when she saw me. Beside her, Robert, uncomfortable, but resolute, and my sons, Caleb and Lucas, standing by the fireplace, looking nervously from me to her and back. What is she doing here? Veronica hissed at Robert. Have you completely lost your mind? The game is over, Veronica, Robert replied calmly. The boys know the truth. I know the truth. You have two options: accept an arrangement or face the legal consequences of what you did. Her face twisted into a mask of fury. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. And who's going to believe a crazy woman who's spent years obsessed with someone else's life? We have proof, I intervened, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Altered hospital records, witnesses to your visits while I was in a coma. The DNA test proving we are identical twins, contradicting what you've told many people. Even evidence suggesting you caused the accident that put me in a coma. She paled even more, but quickly regained her composure. So what? Are you going to drag your own children through a public scandal? Make them the laughingstock of their school? Destroy the life I built for them, a life much better than you could ever have given them? It was Caleb who answered, stepping forward. We've already decided, Mom, or Veronica, or whoever you are. His almost man's voice was firm, resolute. We want our real mother in our lives, without scandals, without courts, without destroying what we've built so far. but we are not giving up on her." Lucas nodded, standing beside his brother, his eyes shining with determination. "And if you don't accept, we will support her in going all the way with the evidence, even if it means you go to jail." I saw something break in Veronica's eyes at that moment. The realization that she had lost what mattered most to her, the love and loyalty of my children. Even after raising them for so many years, in the end, blood was thicker than water. Or maybe it was just the truth, finally coming to light after being buried for so long. "What's the deal?" she asked finally, her voice defeated. The terms were simple. Veronica would continue to be Josephine Thompson publicly. She would keep the office, the house, the marriage with Robert, which by then was more of a business partnership than a loving relationship. But I would be introduced as a close cousin who had just moved to town. I could see my children openly, build a relationship with them, be present in their lives. Over time, when they were adults and independent, they could decide for themselves whether or not to reveal the truth to the world. "Why are you accepting this?" Veronica asked me when we were alone for a moment, the others discussing details in the kitchen. "You could destroy everything I have. You could see me in jail. Why aren't you doing it?" Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but showing them they never truly won. Josephine understood that true identity isn't found in a name or in possessions. But will this agreement truly bring peace? Or is it just the beginning of a new, complicated chapter? I looked at her, my distorted reflection, the sister I never knew, the woman who stole my life, and I felt something unexpected: pity. Because I've understood something over all these years, Veronica. Our life is more than our name, our possessions, our social status. It's more than our roles as mother, wife, professional. It's who we are inside. It's our essence. You may have stolen my external identity, but you never managed to take who I truly am. She stared at me, confused. "I don't understand." "I know," I replied simply. "And that's why, even having everything that was mine, you were never truly happy, never felt complete, because you were living a lie." Unexpected tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't know anything about me, about my life before." "Then tell me," I challenged. "Who are you, Veronica? For real?" And that's how I discovered the other side of the story. How my twin sister, adopted by a rich but emotionally abusive family in New York, grew up feeling that something fundamental was missing. How she accidentally discovered her adoption at 15 and began an obsessive search for her origins. How she found her way to Willow Creek, to my parents, to me. And how, watching me from afar for years, she developed a sick envy for the life she thought should have been hers. "You had everything I dreamed of," she confessed. "Loving parents, a husband who adored you, healthy children, your own business. While I had none of that. It didn't justify what she did. Nothing could. But it helped me to understand, and in some strange way, to begin to forgive. Not for her, but for myself. Because the weight of the hatred I carried for years was consuming me from the inside, long after she had done her worst. The following years were of adjustment, of careful reconstruction. I rented an apartment near their house. I started working as an independent financial consultant. I couldn't use my original identity or my degree, but I knew enough to get by. The boys came to see me regularly, then started spending weekends with me. We built a new relationship, different from the one we would have had if I had never disappeared, but genuine and deep in its own way. Veronica and I maintained a tense truce in the early years. Eventually, over time, something resembling mutual acceptance developed. We would never be friends. We would never fully trust each other. But we learned to coexist, united by the love for the same children. Because whether I wanted to admit it or not, she also loved them, in her own way. Robert and I never got back together as a couple. Too many wounds, too many betrayals, too much time had passed. He remained married to Veronica publicly, although I suspected they had separate rooms for years. We had a cordial relationship, centered on the children. His cowardice hurt me for a long time, but eventually I understood that everyone deals with impossible situations in the best way they can. Some of us fight, others adapt, others run away. I can't judge him completely. Not after everything. Time passed. My children grew up, went to college, started their own lives. Caleb graduated in law, influenced, perhaps, by the injustice he saw up close in our story. Lucas went into medicine, specializing in the rehabilitation of coma patients, another choice that didn't seem like a coincidence. They both got married, gave me lovely grandchildren who know me only as Grandma Josephine, although to the rest of the world I am Aunt Cecilia, the distant cousin who came to live in the city years ago. Looking back now, at 75, with the certainty that my time is running out, I realize that identity is something much more complex than a name on a document, than a social title, than a role we play. It is the sum of our choices, our struggles, our ability to love, even when it seems impossible. Veronica may have stolen my name, my house, my husband, even precious years with my children, but she could never steal who I am inside. And in the end, that's what really matters. Because when all is said and done, when names and titles are forgotten, what remains is the love we gave, the difference we made in the lives of those we love. And in that, even in the darkest years, I was never truly defeated. I thought I had uncovered all the secrets of my story, but life saves its cruelest twists for last. It happened shortly after I turned 72. Caleb was renovating the old house in Willow Creek when workers found a hidden chest in the attic. Inside, a metal box held letters from my mother to Veronica, dated years before my accident. Holding them, my hands trembled. The first letter, dated 1975, read, "Dear Veronica, it was such a surprise to discover you have found us." My mother not only knew, she had been corresponding with her, sharing details of my life. The final letter shattered what was left of my heart. "As for your plan," my mother wrote, "I can neither approve nor condemn it. If you truly believe you deserve her life more than she does, well, only you can make that decision." An unspoken permission, a silent complicity. Betrayal from a stranger is painful enough, but betrayal from the very person who gave you life, that is perhaps a wound that can never heal. This pain rewrote Josephine's entire past. And it also reveals a horrifying truth about Veronica's motive, which we are about to learn. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no. She had left the door open for Veronica to walk through and destroy my life. The betrayal was absolute, cutting deeper than anything Veronica had done. My own mother had, in her own way, sanctioned the replacement. This is perhaps the most unbelievable part of my entire story, isn't it? Betrayal from a stranger is one thing, but from the very person who gave you life. It took me many, many years to understand that guilt can poison a soul and turn a mother into a monster. She didn't choose me, and she didn't choose Veronica. She chose to run from her own past. In that moment, the floor of my world didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust. The betrayal from Veronica was a clean, sharp wound, inflicted by an enemy. This, from my own mother, was a poison that seeped into every memory I had of her. Her hands baking apple pie, her voice singing lullabies, the scent of lavender on her clothes, all of it was now tainted. It was a betrayal that rewrote my entire childhood, turning a sanctuary into a lie. I sank to the floor of the dusty attic, the letters scattered around me, and I didn't scream. I made a sound I'd never heard before, a hollow, guttural noise of a soul being torn in two. Veronica had stolen my life, but my mother had stolen my past. 6 months later, Veronica fell ill with an aggressive cancer. The boys said she was asking for me. It took me a month to find the courage to go. The woman in the hospital bed was a withered, jaundiced version of myself. "You came," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I came," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the anger I once felt, replaced by a profound weariness. "I know you found the letters," she said, her eyes, mirrors of my own, filling with a strange clarity. "I know you know about your mother." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "She never loved me," Veronica rasped. "Not really. She felt guilt. She saw me as a second chance, a way to fix a past mistake. She told me everything about you, fed my envy until it was a monster. She made me believe your life was rightfully mine for the taking. It doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing does. But it was born from that poison." Unexpected tears welled in her eyes. I thought I could steal your life and be happy, but I never was. Not for a single day, because it wasn't my life to live. She turned her face to look at me, a final plea in her gaze. Forgive me? The question hung between us, heavy as lead. Forgiving the architect of my ruin? Forgiving the years of pain, the stolen moments, the lies? I looked at my sister, my thief, my shadow, and saw only a broken woman dying with a lifetime of regrets. I'm trying, I finally answered, the most honest response I could give. Every day, I'm trying. Forgiveness is never a destination, it's a journey. And Josephine's answer is perhaps the most honest thing any of us can feel. Veronica is gone, but the secrets and the pain she left behind remain. Where will Josephine's life go now that all scores seem to be settled? Let's listen to the final part of this tragic, yet resilient, story. She nodded slightly, as if that were enough. And perhaps, for both of us, it was. Veronica passed away 2 weeks later. The secrets of her motivations and my parents' complicity were now buried with her. But the truth I had discovered was a scar I would carry forever. I closed the document and put it in a drawer, not knowing exactly what to do with it. Show it to my children? They already knew the essentials. Did they really need to know all the sordid details? Use it as legal proof now that Veronica was dead and couldn't defend herself? For what? To tarnish her memory? To traumatize the family even more? I saw no purpose in it. The truth that mattered, that I was the real Josephine, was already known by those who needed to know. The 2 years since Veronica's death have been about adjustment, reconstruction, a new and unexpected balance. Robert could finally be publicly honest about our past, not revealing the substitution, of course, but at least acknowledging that Josephine had passed away and that he was now reconnecting with me, the cousin, who had always been nearby. We even went out to dinner a few times, like old friends reminiscing about old times. The romantic love had died decades ago, but a fondness remained, a shared history that no one else could understand. My children, now free from the burden of keeping such a huge secret, began to include me more openly in their lives. Caleb invited me to be an honorary partner at his law firm, working as a consultant on financial cases. Lucas asked me to help manage the clinic he opened. Both made sure my grandchildren knew me as Grandma Josephine, even if to the rest of the world I remained Aunt Cecilia. At family parties, Sunday lunches, grandchildren's birthdays, I began to occupy a place that was rightfully mine. Not exactly the same place I would have occupied if the accident had never happened, if Veronica had never entered our lives. It was an ambiguous, complex position, built on decades of absence and lies, but it was a real, genuine place, one with tears and determination. It was Lucas who made the most perceptive observation at one of those Sunday lunches. "You know, Mom," he said, "I was thinking. In a strange way, you both raised us. You gave us life, loved us in our first years, planted the seeds of who we are. She raised us in your absence, continued the work, even if it was based on a terrible lie." He paused, looking at his own children playing in the garden. "We are who we are today because of both of you, as complicated as that is to admit. It was a difficult but undeniable truth. My children carried marks of both of us. From me, they inherited tenacity, uncompromising honesty, a commitment to truth over appearances. From Veronica, diplomacy, social skills, perhaps even a certain ability to reinvent themselves when necessary. I couldn't deny that, despite everything, she had been a good mother to them in the years I was absent, imperfect, built on lies, but present and, in her own twisted way, loving. "You two are living proof that some things are stronger than lies," I replied, holding his hand. "True love leaves marks that not even time can erase. You recognized me in the depths of your souls, even after so many years. No one could steal that. It's strange how life comes full circle. Now, at 75, with a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, I am in the same situation Veronica was in 2 years ago. The doctor gave me 6 months, tops. I told the boys bluntly. We have always been honest with each other, especially after so many years of lies. They were devastated, of course, but I reassured them as best I could. "I've lived much more than I ever expected," I told them. "I got back what truly mattered. You, my identity, my inner peace. The rest is a bonus. The truth is, I'm not afraid of death. I've been close to it before, floating in that coma limbo for almost 2 years. I've already lost everything a person can lose: family, name, identity, livelihood, and I survived. I've seen the worst that human beings can do to each other, and also the best. What could death show me that I haven't already seen? If I've learned anything on this crazy journey that has been my life, it's that our identity is not just a name on a document, a social title, a role we play for others. Identity is what remains when everything else is taken from you. It is the irreducible core of your being, which neither time, nor distance, nor the worst betrayals can completely destroy. When I lost everything: my name, my husband, my children, my house, my business, I thought I had lost myself too. But I discovered in the pain and struggle to recover those pieces that the most important thing was never taken from me: my essence, my inner truth, my capacity to love and to fight for what is rightfully mine. If you are listening to this, and you feel lost, invisible, or erased, know this: your identity is not what people call you. It is not the life others try to force upon you. It is the unquenchable fire in your soul, the truth that whispers to you in the darkest of nights. Hold on to that truth, fight for it, because it is the only thing that can never truly be stolen. I am Josephine Sage Thompson. I was erased from the world, but I refuse to disappear. I am here to tell you that it is never too late to reclaim your story. It is never too late to find your voice, and your voice has the power to change the world. Thank you for listening to my journey. This is the first time I have told my full story, and it will be my last. If my life can serve as a single beacon of hope for someone else, then every moment of my struggle has been worth it. What are your thoughts on my story? Have you ever felt like you had to fight for your own truth? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. Let's create a community of survivors, together. And if my message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and resilience.